The SEC tournament is about to get underway, and I think our champion is going to be wearing blue and white.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be giving our SEC tournament predictions. We're going to be asking the question, does Kentucky have an SEC tournament title in them? Also going to be discussing the potential new NIL Collective for Kentucky basketball. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Got the SEC tournament coming up later tonight. Going to be giving you my predictions here now on the show. And what better way to do it, ladies and gentlemen? If you're watching on YouTube, you get to see this. If you're listening on podcast, print out your bracket, go over and pull it up online and follow along with me and let me know who you think is going to win the SEC tournament. But what better way to do it here than on Microsoft Paint? Ladies and gentlemen, here I have pulled up the SEC tournament bracket, and I am going to be going through it and writing down my different predictions here as we go through the show today. So let's go ahead and take a look at what should be the first matchup here in the SEC tournament, and that is going to be Vanderbilt versus Arkansas, the 13 seed versus the 12 seed. Arkansas finishing 15-16, 6-12 in the SEC. Vanderbilt 9-22, 4-14. I've continued to say it about Arkansas so far this season. They have really disappointed despite having what I believe to be a pretty solid talent level overall. I mean, they've got dudes that can really play, I think, on both sides of the ball, but they just have not come together so far this season to make a coherent, cohesive team. Khalif Battle, Tremont Mark, Mekhi Mitchell, some of the guys there that you're looking at that are really popping off for this team. Jeremiah Davenport has been the primary power forward here over the last few games. I really, really like Tremont Mark's game. I think he is a fun basketball player, good shooter, good overall guard. You look at Vanderbilt, and this is something that I've said about the Commodores as well. They have in the past, they've had a number of really, really good guards. In fact, the Commodores just a couple of years ago had Scottie Pippen Jr., who was, some people called him a ball hog. I think that it was just a product of what Jerry Stackhouse's system produces, which is a lot of ISO situations. And when you have a guy that is that good at scoring the rock, it's kind of hard to not give it to him. But Vanderbilt in the past has had good guard play. And to be honest with you, so far this season, they're getting some decent guard play from Ezra Mannion and Tyron Lawrence, the two seniors there. They're going to need to break in a lot of new pieces next season, and I think they got a lot of guys coming off the bench. Will Stackhouse be here next season, regardless of whether or not they make a run in the SEC tournament? That is a question that I think we need to ask here. But overall, in this matchup, I don't really know if we're going to see a ton of fight from the Vanderbilt Commodores. If you look earlier on this season, the Commodores actually beat the Hogs on February 27th by 3 on the road in Fayetteville. How much fight are we going to see this time? I'm not quite sure. Arkansas, I think, again, just has a little bit better of an overall talent. They have a talent gap between these two teams. So I am going to put the Arkansas Razorbacks, and it's going to be kind of difficult for me to do here, but we're going to put Arky in, and this is going to be kind of rough to look at, but you get my point here. So the Arkansas Razorbacks moving to on to the second round to face South Carolina in my book, and then the second game here between Missouri and Georgia, game 2 tonight at 8 o'clock or 25 minutes after game 1. I should say Georgia has been a team this year that I said at the beginning of the year, they were pretty mediocre. They were pretty flavorless. Not a whole lot to say about them. And to be honest with you, that really hasn't changed. Overall, 16-15 after starting the year off 12-3, and at one point they were 14-5, 4-2 in conference play. Statistically, on either side of the ball, they're not really impressive. in any category. And if you look at conference-only statistics, they are 9th or worse in almost every single stat on that side of the ball on KenPom, from shooting numbers to assists to offensive rebounding to turnover percentage. It is just really, really rough, and they hit a massive rough patch there towards the end of January. They just haven't been very good. It's a pretty balanced rotation. It's a tall rotation. It's a relatively experienced rotation, but they got a lot of wins early, and they've been really struggling here to end the year. So Georgia, a team that I'm not very excited about, but they're going up against a team that I'm pretty disappointed in, all things considered. The Missouri Tigers, 8-23, 0-18 in SEC play. 0-18 after coming off a year in which Missouri went 25-10 in Dennis Gates' first season. The only thing Missouri does well is shoot free throws. They shoot 80.6% in conference play. They've got a really good guard in Sean East, who has a really high true shooting percentage and shoots 46% from deep. But overall, I don't really think there's a whole lot else to say here. I think that Missouri is probably going to lose this game, despite Georgia just not being very good. So we're going to put UGA here, moving on to the second round. So your second round here that I will be going through: Mississippi State, LSU, Arkansas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Georgia, Florida. We're going to get to Kentucky here in just a moment. Before we get to the Kentucky Wildcats, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Going to be getting to the Kentucky predictions here in just a second, but first going to do the second round of the SEC tournament. As you can see on YouTube, my pretty horrible MS Paint writing on the bracket here. If you're listening on podcast, you get to fill this out with me if you've got a bracket online or if you've got one printed out already. Super excited for this tournament. Let's go ahead and get to the 8-9 matchup. Something that I think should be a pretty fun game here. LSU versus Mississippi State. LSU 17-14, 9-9 overall in SEC play. Mississippi State 19-12, 8-10. Let's start with the Bulldogs here. Mississippi State, at one point, ranked in the top 25. And they started the year off with a lot of wins, and it was against some relatively weak competition. And we here had some questions about whether or not their defense was going to be as good as advertised. Their offense still kind of, lagging behind in a lot of different areas. The offense through SEC play has improved. The defense has actually taken a little bit of a dip, and they are on a 4-game losing streak here to end the regular season. Obviously, the big players here. Tolu Smith, the forward, 6'11", 245 pounds. Josh Hubbard, freshman, shooting all over the place, shooting 36.7% from deep. Against LSU, I think this should make for a fun matchup. In the first go-round against the Bulldogs, LSU lost at home by 20. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Mississippi State just went ballistic from three. I think we actually talked about this on the show. Mississippi State, 10-21 from downtown. That was 47.6%. LSU couldn't buy a shot from outside the arc, especially in the second half, and Mississippi State was just able to kind of pull away. Jordan Wright, Vanderbilt transfer from LSU, has been really good this year. Jalen Cook, guard, who has only played about half the season. Will Baker, the 7-foot senior, he's been interesting to watch this season. Trey Hannibal has been getting a lot of run at point guard. He's not necessarily a shooter, which is really weird, but he can distribute pretty effectively. LSU, Mississippi State should make for, I think, an interesting matchup because of how desperate Mississippi State is to pick up a win here to get closer to off of the bubble or at least into the NCAA tournament. LSU playing with a little desperation as well. If they can possibly somehow miraculously get to the championship game, they may have a conversation here. I think Mississippi State, just based off of that first result, my assumption is that they will win this game. I don't think it will be by 20, but I certainly do think that State playing with a little bit more or having a little bit more to play for, I think that Mississippi State will end up moving on to the quarterfinals here to face off against Tennessee. Wow, look at that M that I just scribbled in there on MS Paint. So, Arkansas, South Carolina. Game 4, second round of the SEC tournament. Hope you're following along with me here on your bracket. South Carolina surprisingly falls to the 5th seed after having such a good season, 25-6 overall, 13-5 in the SEC, lost some crucial games down the stretch. That game against LSU after their loss to Auburn, lost that game by 1 at home. That was massive to put them at 9-4 and kind of keep them out of that race there for the double bye towards the end of the season. Auburn winning, Kentucky winning, closed them out. South Carolina, though, I think balanced on both sides of the ball, not particularly terrible at anything other than drawing fouls. I think they've really, really struggled with that so far this season. They've got guys that can shoot threes. B.J. Johnson, B.J. Mack, surprisingly at 6'8", 270. He's been chucking a lot of outside shots. Miles Studi out of Vanderbilt. He's been really good off the bench, shooting 39.6%. Talon Cooper shooting 45% from deep. I mean, they've got different guards on this team that can light it up, and they play some pretty solid defense as well. Pretty solid interior defense, I might add. Against Arkansas, how will the South Carolina team match up? If you look at the previous contest between Arkansas and South Carolina won it on the road, 77-64. This was right in the middle of the season, January 20th. And I don't really know what's pulling me away from South Carolina in this one, but my gut's telling me, for some reason, that Arkansas wins this game. I don't know why. I don't have a great reason, but I just don't know if South Carolina is going to be able to do it for literally no other reason than my gut. So with that being said, I'm going to put Arkansas here. Moving on. Put the 12, put that horrible A, the R, and the K. Moving on to the quarterfinals against Auburn. All right, and here's the game that I think everybody's going to be paying attention to, obviously, as Wildcat fans. Texas A&M versus Ole Miss. Ole Miss, Texas A&M faced off to end the season. A&M won on the road by 26 points. Aggies coming into this game, by the way, having won 3 straight games against Georgia, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. The shooting numbers for this Aggie squad are, quite frankly, horrific. They are last in the SEC in effective field goal percentage. Next to last in three-point percentage, shooting 28.1%. Makes me want to gag. 44.4% inside the arc. That is the worst in the SEC. They get blocked the most in the SEC. But what they do on offense, that brings them all the way up inside the top 50 of adjusted efficiency, according to Ken Pom, is they grab offensive rebounds better than anybody in the nation. 42% of misses are offensive rebounds. And the team's not particularly tall. You're pretty much starting 6'7" or 6'8" at center, unless you're going with I believe it's Wildens Levesque, if that's how you pronounce it. I believe he's out of South Carolina, the transfer there, 6'11", 250, but he doesn't get a ton of run. Wade Taylor is your dude. At 6 foot, 175 pounds, he was predicted to be SEC Player of the Year coming into this season. Tyrese Radford, Henry Coleman, Jace Carter, none of these guys can shoot. Manny Obaseki is the only player in this rotation that I'm looking at right now that shoots even above 31%. Shoots 40% from beyond the arc. That is rough. That is really, really rough for Texas A&M. Going up against an Ole Miss team that they just throttled. Ole Miss, decent on offense. Good three-point shooting team. Not that great on defense. They don't hold opponents to good shooting numbers. They are terrible at grabbing defensive rebounds. They started the year 18-3, 5-3 in the SEC. And then their primary scorers kind of took a dip in efficiency. Alan Flanagan tanked to where now he's shooting less than 28% from three. Matthew Morrell kind of took a step back. Jalen Murray not shooting phenomenally to end the season phenomenally. I think if I had to just guess, Ole Miss is going to lose this game because of the way that they've been trending, because how the most recent contest with A&M played out. My guess is that Texas A&M is going to win this one. I don't really have a lot of faith in the Rebels right now. So we'll go A&M to face off against Kentucky. And then the final game of the second round here, Georgia versus Florida. Boys, I'm going to keep this one short and simple. I think Florida wins this game. Florida won the first matchup against the Bulldogs at home in overtime, and they won the second matchup on the road by 6. I like this Florida team. They grab offensive rebounds. They're not terrible at shooting. They play with pace. They've got height. They've got 2 really good guards in Walter Clayton Jr. and Zion Pullen. Experienced guards. Got a pretty solid center. Pretty solid rotation at center, I might add. Tyrese Samuel, Alex Condon, Micah Handglotton, transfer from Marshall, who is phenomenal at grabbing offensive boards. All 3 of those guys really solid in their front court with 2 really good guards. Do not see the Gators losing this one. I just don't. So we're going to put a 6 here. Let's just put FL. And there you have it. Your quarterfinals: Mississippi State, Tennessee, Arkansas, Auburn, A&M, Kentucky, Alabama, and Florida. Let's do this final few games here. Where does Kentucky end up? I'm pretty straightforward on how I feel about the Wildcats in this SEC tournament. We'll dive into that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tournament this season. Whether you're betting a big upset on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, wrapping up the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you guys filling out this SEC tournament bracket with me. We'll go ahead and continue along here. Get to Kentucky's games finally. As you can see, my bracket here with the very terrible Microsoft Paint drawings here. By the way, if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, I would really appreciate it if you went ahead and did that. By the way, in case you don't know, we are doing an ESPN bracket challenge for the Locked On Kentucky fan base over again on ESPN. If you would like to go check that out, the link is in the description. I'll leave that on both podcast and YouTube in case you want to check that out, trying to get as many folks in there as possible. So join up. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So we've got our quarterfinals here against Mississippi State and Tennessee. The fun thing about this game is, if I'm not mistaken, Tennessee lost this contest, at least the first go-around. I think they only played once. Yes, that is correct. On the road, Tennessee lost this game 77-72, and we talked about this. We talked about this when we discussed the Vols, about how randomly in conference play, they just laid a couple of eggs. They laid a couple of eggs. And this was one where they shot poorly from 3. They shot poorly from the foul line. They did not do a great job out-rebounding the opponent. And Mississippi State ended up winning on pretty average shooting numbers. They just ended up clutching the game out towards the very end. Now, the question we have to ask here about this bracket, this Tennessee team that just lost to Kentucky with pretty similar results. They shot poorly from three. They shot poorly from the foul line. Kentucky out-rebounded Tennessee by a significant margin. They shot really bad from inside the arc as well. Does this Tennessee team, with all of their talent surrounding Dalton Connect, do they have it in them to slip up again, or at least slip up twice in a row? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say UT wins this one, and I'm going to bring them on to the semifinals against the matchup between Arkansas and Auburn. This is going to be the quickest one we do today. Auburn blew out the Hogs the first time they played in Fayetteville. Auburn's probably going to win this game. Auburn coming into the tournament shooting really, really well. After that Kentucky game, they started lighting things up, and Auburn, I think, is a team that you're probably going to have issues with if you are Tennessee. A&M, Kentucky. Here's the matchup. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, first time around. Well, actually, let me say this before I say anything else. Texas A&M could win this game. They could win this game by 30, right? They won the first matchup. They could win this game by 1,000,000. Here's what it took for Texas A&M to win this game first time around. It took overtime. It took their two star guards, Wade Taylor and Tyrese Radford, combining for 63 points. It took them outshooting the Wildcats by, I believe, 10 free throws. And it took Kentucky shooting sub-average numbers and missing a couple of different things that did not allow them to close the game out at the very end. It was a hodgepodge of a lot of different things that prevented Kentucky from winning this game the first time around. I think at a neutral site, Kentucky pays attention, they lock in, they get this win. It will be rough. It will probably be ugly. But I think UK is going to be moving on to the semifinals. And then you've got Florida versus Alabama. Florida versus Alabama is going to be super interesting if that happens, because the Crimson Tide are on a slide. Did not mean for that to rhyme. Since February 7th, I said this on the most recent episode, I think. I'm going to say it again here. Alabama has allowed, since February 7th, in their games, 99 points, 92, 79, 75, 98, 117, 88, 81, 105, 92. 88. I'm sorry, man, I really botched that. Point being, they're giving up almost 90 points plus every single game for the last month. The defense is not good. They don't turn opponents over. They don't grab offensive rebounds. They really stink at preventing opponents from getting to the foul line, and they don't have a good interior defense. It's actually pretty bad, all things considered. The offense, excellent. Mark Sears, phenomenal. Aaron Estrada, I think a little underrated. And if he was the lead guard this year, I think he'd have better numbers. Grant Nelson, overrated. Enough said there. Florida has split this series 1-1, with the Gators losing in overtime at Alabama and drubbing the Crimson Tide the second time around, second to last game of the season. I think that this is your upset of the quarterfinals. I think Florida moves on to play Kentucky. And so your semifinals are going to be Tennessee, Auburn, Kentucky, Florida. And you guys know where I'm probably going to go with this. I think Auburn beats Tennessee. If you go and watch that game against the Vols played against the Tigers just a couple of weeks ago, Auburn played a really, really good game in Knoxville, But Dalton Knecht went off, and it wasn't enough. The officiating, per SEC standards, was abysmal on both sides of the ball in that game. It was horrendous. Calls missed both ways almost every single time down the floor. It was egregious. You get him at a neutral site. You get a second shot at him. I think this Auburn team has rebounded, and I think they'll face off against Kentucky in the SEC championship. I think Kentucky plays well against Florida, third time around. I think they end up closing this game out, and they do it unlike their first two matchups against the Gators. And they will face off against Auburn in the SEC championship game. And I think Kentucky does it again. I think Kentucky wins the SEC tournament. Going to put them down there. Scribble that in on Microsoft Paint. I think Kentucky, again, with their length and their size, they're able to affect Auburn's guards, affect what they want to do offensively, prevent them from getting into rhythm and running their sets effectively. And I think Kentucky does enough on the offensive end of the floor to win the game. Kentucky has not won an SEC tournament title in quite some time. I think that ends this season. And to wrap this up here, I will go ahead and sign my name here at the bottom. Wow, that was terrible. We'll do that one more time. Excellent. Absolutely perfect. If you're not watching on YouTube, you may want to go check that out. That was pathetic. So, Kentucky, I think, wins the SEC championship. And so now you head into March as a really strong 3 seed, possible 2. And there's one more thing we got to talk about here. Another bit of good news here as we wade towards the SEC the SEC tournament here tonight. Closer and closer. Matt Jones of KSR tweeted out and said, some news. Hearing an official Kentucky basketball NIL fund will be officially launched tomorrow for the purpose of making UK basketball the top NIL destination in college basketball. Calipari and others part of the launch. Potential big deal for Kentucky basketball going forward. Couple different tweets here from Matt Jones as well. As part of the new Kentucky basketball NIL fund, fans will be able to participate in ways that include donations, but also being active in non-financial ways. Don't know all the details, but sounds innovative and interesting to me. Should be exciting. Jones also said, as a practical matter, I think the launch of the UK basketball NIL fund is an embracing of the NIL era for Kentucky in a way that is definitely needed. I get the sense everyone around UK, from Calipari to Mitch to the administration, is behind this, and that's a very good sign. And that's where I want to close here today. Finally, we can get Mitch, we can get Calipari, we can get everybody behind doing something that benefits this program. And it comes in the form of something that is just the identity here of a transition into the modern era. You get to see the shift with moves like this. This will help, after April, this will help Kentucky in the transfer portal. That was my immediate knee-jerk reaction to this. This will be awesome for future Kentucky players. Sweet. But for now, this will help Kentucky get their point guard in the transfer portal this offseason. Go get him. I think Kentucky can do it. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.